Yeah, it's not like it used to be. As far as schooling is, everything's computer. I'm like taking notes. I'm the oldest person in my class, and it's not easy. Let me put it that way. It's not easy today, but I'm getting there.
But she's an inspiration because she's almost at her doctorate level.
Yes,
so,
yes. Thank you.
And it's forensics.
Cultural forensic anthropology. So, no, down in Eastern University near Philadelphia. So.
She travels far, so she could probably tell we could have 2 hours on her life, right? But anyway, this is fascinating. I won't say anything more except what a pleasure it is and
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you. A nice little group. Thank you so much. Thank you, folks, for the welcome. Appreciate that. Okay. So first, let me introduce my husband over here. He thinks he's a king today. He's sitting in the king and queen seat. That's my husband, Larry. Larry and I, when we married, we had all kind of hobbies, and we had all kind of interests and things. He was a big fisherman. I was the president of the bird club. And we got so bored with each other, looking at the birds, fishing. And we started actually as a hobby 27 years ago. We started finding little arrowheads, artifacts on the shoreline of the Susquehanna. So the artifact bug bites you. And then when I saw all these things that we're finding on the islands, I thought, I got to know who these things belong to, what the time period was. So fast forward, I went back to school with my anthropology degree, archaeology, and things like that. And before that, I also was more in the medical profession. I had degrees in medical technology, nursing, and that really helped a lot, believe it or not, because now I'm involved doing what they call residue analysis. I'm also with carbon-14 dating. So I'm more now on the science end of things, which is very nice. And my husband, Larry, who's really creative, he does reproduction pottery for the various museums around the area. But he does it exactly like the Susquehanna and Shanks Ferry. So it's very nice that we're able to have actual visual displays of what these things look like, as opposed to all these small little pieces that you find in the ground, okay? So let me tell you a little bit more about all the different hats I have, and then we're gonna have Robin put a video on for you. So, like I said, I wear many hats. I'm the curator of Indian Steps Museum. How many people have been, okay, there you go. A lot of people, Indian Steps Museum. I didn't realize it. Oh, you. These are all my friends I remember from Indian Steps. I'm still there. We just hired a new director, Paul Nevin. He just came on 3 weeks ago. And Paul is, those of you who know Paul, he is the expert on petroglyphs. So if anybody ever needed to do a petroglyph tour or something like that, then you could get in touch with Paul, and he takes you out to the petroglyphs. Then Blue Rock, which is not that far from here, Blue Rock, we opened that up about 5 years ago. And it's a heritage center. So most of our things are Native American, but I want to focus on the footprint of the land. Who came after the Shanks Ferry, the Susquehannocks, the colonists, the Whitmer sites, all these different people who had an impact on that land. And right now we're doing excavation. So if anybody would like to excavate with us, I'm going to give you our cards. You come on board as one of our team members. My job is to train your eye to recognize things. Bobby, you would be fabulous on our team because you already found artifacts. You have a good eye for that. And then it's a citizen scientist program. You meet a lot of great people with a very diverse background. It's a lot of fun. And then Teresa, thankfully, did invite me here. So my job right now is going to take you back 10,000 years in time. And we are going to start with a video. Before we play that, I just want to set this up. A lot of people, when you go to analyze archaeology, you have to know what time period you're in. For example, down in Indian Steps, I did a big archaeological site there. That dates back to 10,000 years ago. Most of those artifacts that you see in Indian Steps Museum are not recent. They're between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, these big axes. These are some of the real artifacts that after the lecture, I want you to come up and touch it, feel it, see how heavy these things are. But I want to give you with this overall video that my dear friend Jerry Musser and his wonderful wife Jeanette is here. Thank you for that. Came, and Jerry is the one who created the video with me directing and having the narration. So, okay, Robin, if you don't mind, would you please play the Blue Rock Heritage video? Could you hear?
The Susquehanna River. This is a river that's 444 miles long. It's the largest river on the East Coast, and it started from upstate New York into the Chesapeake Bay. It was actually known in ancient times as the Indian Highway.
Why don't you come around?
Pennsylvania archaeologists have a way of establishing a timeline, and they delineated in Pennsylvania into 5 basic categories. It's Paleo-Indian, Archaic, Transitional, Woodland, and Contact period. Let's talk first about the Paleo-Indian. The earliest evidence in Pennsylvania where man has been hunting mastodon is actually 16,000 BC. This primitive man were still nomadic, and they were hunting big game animals. What they had are these long spears with a projectile point. The projectile point is called clovis. This particular point is actually channeled or fluted. They were massive, and they were meant to take down big game. Then they had an atlatl, which would actually help increase the distance of the throw, because primitive man didn't want to get too close to their prey. So what they would do is they would try to increase their distance and take down the big animals. Next comes the Archaic period. That starts around 8000 BC. Still, these primitive people were in nomadic small bands, and they're still hunting and foraging for food. You might ask, well, what's the evidence that we had people back in those days? What did these ancient ones leave behind? Things such as hides and bones and grasses and wood. That decomposes very quickly in our acidic soil, especially here in Pennsylvania. So all they really did leave were the stone tools. The transitional period, which was 2000 to 1000 BC, here's where really big changes occurred. The actual blade on the spear itself became very long and very broad. They actually are called Susquehanna broad spears. Another big change in the transitional period came in the form of discovering soapstone. Soapstone is also known as steatite. What it is actually is a form of talc. It is soft, it's able to be carved. So the ancient ones took this outcropping of this type of material, and they actually shaped cooking bowls so that they can actually cook over an open fire. The problem with stone tool technology, especially when the Native Americans were preparing their foods, there's a lot of grit that comes when grinding and preparing. What happens is a lot of these little bits of stone get into the food, and then when they were chewing, it would actually wear down their teeth, their enamel, and they would be exposed roots, therefore causing sepsis. The next period is the Woodland period. That's 1000 BC to 1550 AD. Now picture these people are now beginning to settle down into small encampments, particularly around rivers and small streams. Their food source became a little bit more variety. It became increased because they started to become farmers. Here's where agriculture started to begin. So they had a variety that they were starting to actually grow some crops. The late Woodland period saw a great change. This is when the bow and arrow technology came. No longer were they using the big broad spears. Now the projectile point was now a small triangular shaped point, and it was made from various cherts in the area. The late Woodland also brought pottery. Since these tribes are now living in small hamlets or even longhouses, pottery was now used to store grains. They are also used as a cooking vessel, and even there's decorated ceremonial vessels. The progression of pottery went from steatite stone bowls to a flat bottom pot to a round bottom pot and eventually it was discarded altogether, and that's where the brass kettles took their place. The contact period is marked by trade interactions. This occurs from 1550 to 1750. A remarkable change occurred within the Native American societies when they came in contact with the Europeans. As you advance in time, a lot of the native articles were replaced by European goods. In particular, the iron axes, the glass bottles and beads, colonial pipes, guns, and alcohol. The origins of the Susquehanna started in upstate New York. They had common roots with the Iroquois around 1450 AD. They started migrating south into the Lower Susquehanna Valley. As they moved down the Susquehanna River, the first village they occupied was the Schultz site from 1525 to 1600. In fact, the Schultz site is directly across from the Blue Rock Heritage Center. Every 25 years, the Susquehannocks moved their village site. They moved either north or south, basically due to that they used up all the resources within a certain radius. In the village of Washingtonboro, the warriors traveled down the Susquehanna River to meet Captain John Smith in 1608. They met on Garrett Island, which is at the head of the Chesapeake Bay, right around Fort Deposit, Maryland. We do not really know what the Susquehannocks called themselves. In fact, Susquehannog was a descriptive term used by Captain John Smith's interpreter, and this interpreter was Algonquin. The French called the Susquehannocks the Andaste. The Dutch and the Swedes, well, they called them Miga, and it was a rather derogatory term. It actually means stealthy or treacherous.
But we English called them the Conestoga.
But for our purposes, we're going to call them the Susquehannocks. Most of us are familiar with the account between the 60 mighty Susquehanna warriors and Captain John Smith, where Smith described the Susquehannock as giants. He said they have a big, deep voice, actually coming like out of a vault. They wore skins of bears and wolves, and they were accompanied by large clubs and bows and arrows. We know that from history that Smith likes to exaggerate. He liked to sell the concept of colonization to the New World, but physical archaeological evidence in the form of skeletons show the average Susquehanna male around 5.6 feet and the female around 5.2. Trade goods. Native Americans desired for beads in the form for decorations for their jewelry were actually sewn onto their clothing, or they wore them as necklaces. Trade goods also took the form of iron tools, brass kettles. But the Europeans, what did they want in return? Well, they wanted beaver furs, because back in England, beaver hats were all the rage. The Susquehanna women made their pots out of clay coils. They added crushed shells to give it strength, and they paddled the exterior to smooth out the coils and expel air bubbles. They used bone tools. They inscribed intricate triangular lines, and they even formed human faces onto these high collars with rounded bottoms. Some forms of pottery even took on full figures demonstrating their artistic talents. Most of the highly decorated vessels were placed with their loved ones as grave offerings, or they were used as ceremonial vessels, which were to be in a prominent place in the longhouse. Smith complimented the Washingtonboro women potters, and he actually said they were the finest potters comparable to the men who were potters back in England. The Susquehannocks, they actually occupied villages on both sides of the river, but by 1690 to 1763, they ended up in Conestoga Town, Lancaster County. By this time, the Susquehannocks converted to Christianity. They were in decline, both culturally and economically. They actually tried to sustain themselves as farm workers, domestics, or they even succumbed to selling handmade crafts such as brooms and baskets. 1763, a vigilante group called the Paxton Boys was formed to retaliate against local American Indians in the aftermath of the French and Indian War. On December 15th, Activists blamed this Conestoga for helping the enemy and killing settlers. They actually found and killed 3 men, 2 women, and 1 boy. Officials in Lancaster, wishing to protect the remaining innocent Indians, gathered them into the county workhouse. But on September 27th, the Paxton boys stormed the Lancaster jail and murdered at least 20 Native Americans, mostly women, children, and old men. The authorities looked the other way, and no one was ever prosecuted for this violent act.
Did you like the video? Was that better for you? I thought that was trying to get a lot of information from a long span period to kind of condense it so you can get a general overall idea of where we are when I start talking about certain artifacts, where you are in this place of time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to now do a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to do a little bit more detail from what the video was. And then after my presentation, we're going to hold questions until I get, could you hear me now, Robin? So until I get finished. And then what I'd like you to do is come up to the table. You're going to be able to handle, I want you to show you how to handle some of these weapons, some of these stone axes, and for you to examine up close a lot of these artifacts, because it's so nice when you actually have something in your hand and something that's been made 12,000 years ago, okay? All right, so let's start with the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so there I am. There we are, Debbie Saylor. Those of you who have been Indian Steps, you notice there's a kiva table there. It's a big room that John Vandersloot, he used for ceremonies. He duplicated what was out in the Pueblo area. And we have over 10,000 artifacts inside and outside the museum that's embedded in concrete walls and stone walls, something that you could never do today. But back then, remember, this is in 1900. So it's in 1908 to 1912 is when he started making this building. It was a monument to the Native American peoples, and he called them the Ancient Ones. We're up now on the other side of the river. We're here now in Lancaster, down in Blue Rock, down below. It's closer for you from here. And Blue Rock, on the right-hand side, that's an old mill, and that was a Whitmer's mill. And we're right now in the process of doing research for genealogy and the footprint of that land. And then to the left of that, you'll see the mill that we have called Whitmer's Run. So this was a very strategic geographical area, especially for Native American people. So go ahead, Robin. So, and then on that property, right at Blue Rock, are chapters called Chapter 28 as part of the Society for Pennsylvania Archaeology. I'm the chairperson and education director, and Paul Nevin, personal friend, and he is the petroglyph expert, and he's the president of the Lower Susquehanna Archaeological Society. If you ever want to have petroglyph tours, have a petroglyph presentation, Paul is really the best gentleman to present that for you, because he's the one who did all the research for over the last 45 years. Okay. The purpose of our chapter is to identify the excavations, our methods. What we do is people think that, oh, you hurry up, I'm going to go ahead and hurry up and put a shovel in the ground. There's so much work involved before you even step on the property. We have to do what they call STPs. They're called shovel test pits. And everything's all marked out. We're doing things in a deliberate, controlled manner, because archaeology is very, very destructive. Once you dig something, you can't go back and replace it. That's why it's very slow, and we have to go down so many centimeters, and everything's recorded, because you cannot replace that again. Okay? In fact, even now in more modern times in archaeology, we have very few is really open phase 3 archaeology. They do what they call a lot of LIDAR, a lot of magnetometry. So there's a lot of new techniques that do not destroy the footprint of the land. And that's where the technology is leading us. In fact, I went to a conference of last year, and they said, folks, those of you who are archaeologists, leave something for the future. Don't destroy something that you can't get to, because I guarantee you in about 10 years, you're going to have some type of technology that is going to be able to penetrate the ground and you'll be able to see it. So we do have ground penetrating radar now, but it's mostly for just imaging. But there's all kind of new technologies coming out, and there's so many more new things being discovered. Oh, go back one. Okay, on the left-hand side, you'll see there's myself and my husband Larry. We did the excavation in Washington Borough. Washington Borough, this particular unit, this is the village site. It's called 36 Washington Borough, 36 LA 8, where this is the village that Captain John Smith sent warriors from. So these warriors came down, all the way down the Susquehanna, to meet Captain John Smith on Garrett Island. No way did Captain John Smith ever come up the Susquehanna River. No way. It was too rocky, too narrow. But the Native Americans, the Susquehanna, they sent their best men to trade. And then we get the concept and the story of Captain John Smith. On the right-hand side, you'll see I have ground-penetrating radar. This was very helpful. Problem is, we as a small archaeology chapter can't afford these kind of equipment. You're talking $200,000-$300,000. But I had a friend who was nice enough to come up. This is what he does for a living, and he was able to survey the grounds for us. And that revealed a lot of very interesting things, especially on Indian Steps property. So we'll get into that later. I'll give you some secrets. Okay. This is a profile of an excavated unit. So when you're coming on board with me as one of my archaeology students, this is what I'm preaching to you. I'm preaching about the profile of the excavated units. So as you can see, the top portion, you have a golf ball, you have a beer can, and as you start going down, 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 you get to at the very bottom, and there's no artifacts being found. It's called virgin soil. But in between there, those layers have to be measured, and that's when you could find at what state and at what cultural time period. Not only do I have the physical evidence, but I have it's called in situ. It's in situation. It stays on that stratigraphy of that land. So I know that if anything found on that level belongs to that culture. So there are very many indicators to help identify culturally and also identify material and what happened. Was there an earthquake? How many floods were there? This is a roadmap for an archaeologist. Talk about roadmap. Susquehanna River, that was called the Indian Highway. Remember, they didn't have all these roads. They had roads that were along the Susquehanna, but most of them would paddle down all the way from upstate New York. And they did a lot of trade, a lot of trade. The Susquehanna River, just to give you some brief facts, starts in upstate New York near Cooperstown. It empties over the bay, and it's 460 miles long. Okay. These are timelines in Pennsylvania. Timelines are different from every state. Not everything happened all at one time, but I'm strictly going to talk about Pennsylvania. Maryland is actually a little different. But in Pennsylvania, the oldest time period we could have evidence of is called Paleo-Indian, and that's between 16,000 and 8,000 years ago. At Indian Steps, like I said, we found an area that was 10,000 years ago, and then right up the road from Indian Steps at the York Furnace Boat Launch, a 14,000-year-old projectile point was found, and that's in a private collection. So they were around, but remember, when you think of Paleo-Indian, these are not people that are settling. These are nomadic people. They're chasing the big herds. Okay. Here we go. A lot of people think that, I love these pictures that they give. People weren't running around naked like that, okay, especially in Pennsylvania, even during that time period. They always want to say the further back, the more hair or less clothing they have. That's not true. They had clothing, they had hides, wintertime, and not just one person brought down a huge mastodon or mammoth. You had about 25 to 30 men with long javelins that are called atlatls and spears, and they would take down the animal. And most of the time you find these animals in bogs or marshes, because when they would hunt the mastodon or a big game, they would get bogged down in the mud in the marshes, and then they were able to go and get the prey. So don't be confused when you see just one man taking down a big elephant. It doesn't happen that way, okay? So what did they live on? It was still cold and wet. They're taking down woolly mammoths were here, mastodon, right up here in Pennsylvania on Marshall's Creek. I'm from the Pocono area originally, and they found a couple mastodons and a couple of woolly mammoths intact in the back of people's yards. They had these big ivory tusks coming out, and now it's in the State Museum. They were eating also, they just didn't eat big herd animals. They were trapping little moles, little rabbits, any kind of squirrels, anything that they could come about. And the type of technology they had was called Clovis points, and they were big points that they would go on big spears that they were able to throw. Okay. The next period, from Paleo, now we're going down to Archaic, the climate started getting a little bit warmer. This is where their settlement patterns started getting a little different. They were eating more tree nuts, acorns, walnuts, things like that. The environment, going from grassland, you're starting to get little bitty hardwoods. You're starting to get more trees as opposed to grasses. And then their food source, deer, elk, caribou, moose, turkey, fish, freshwater mussels, all these things. The Susquehanna was such an ultimate provider of food. They had so much waterfowl. It was in abundance. In fact, when I talk to you a little later about the colonial diet, these people were healthier. Besides, maybe getting a broken bone and things like that, and no contact with white folks, they had a very good, healthy diet. And then this is where they had what they call nutting stones, or they had stone tools. And when we're finished, you're going to see some of the actual stone tools that they used, because stone doesn't rot in the environment like wood would. Okay. Here we go. Let's start on the top here, top left. These are called fish weights. I guarantee you, if I take you for a walk, you're gonna find a fish weight out in the Susquehanna River. What a lot of the Native Americans did is they made cordage. They took strips of barks and things like that, vines, and they would weave cordage or rope, and then they would tie them around, and they would have baskets. And then they would have what they call fishing wares, where the fish would get trapped in these baskets. But these were nutting weights, and these were very, very common throughout. In fact, I guarantee you, if anybody ever go artifact hunting, that's probably the first thing you're going to find, because I'm going to train your eye on those two notches. And now when you go with me, you say, oh my God, there's so many here. Well, yeah, but you never saw them before. Okay. Next is, go back one. Next are the spear points. These are not arrowheads, even like at Indian's Deaths. Everybody says, oh, look at all the arrowheads. They're not arrowheads. Arrowheads did not come into the area until 1100 AD. They didn't have the bow and arrow until 1100 AD. Before that, what did they use? They used these spears. And I have them all here, and all that's missing is the wooden part that they were hafting, because remember, wood does not last in the environment, and they would tie them on with tendons or ligaments, some type of hide strips, and they would take pine sap, and they would kind of glue that. But after 6,000 to 8,000 years, that's all disintegrated. The next one, we have these axes. We have them here for you. I want you to pick up those these stone axes. See how heavy these suckers are. You're not going to believe it. And again, the stone did survive. Here we have is a nutting stone. This is a little controversial, but I do believe they would have an area where they keep in their hands. They would have this stone, and then they would crack nuts, but mostly they would take a lot of herbs. They were very, very medicinal. And some areas on certain points, and I have one here on one of these stones, there's always double pitted, meaning there's a pit on the bottom and there's a pit on top. And that's because a lot of times they didn't mix herbs. You know how if you're kosher, like Jews have the kosher foods, they don't like to mix, say, milk or meat and things like that. Well, so did the Native American. They kept certain herbs very sacred. So they had a bipedal stone. We'll talk about that later. Okay. Here you go. This is what we brought. We brought one of these stone knives, and they usually have either wood or antler, deer antler, that's used as a handle. Okay. Again, this is a pestle. Bobby, would you do me a favor? Would you give me that pestle that you found? I just met Bobby here, and I identified a few artifacts for her, but she had a really good eye. And look at this. She brought this up for us. And this is a long pestle, is what this is called. And this is not the working end. Don't think like they used it as a rolling pin. This is the working end. So you would have some of those stone tools, or you would have a wooden mortar, and then they would pound this. They would pound corn or nut meats or whatever they needed to make into a special poultice. But that's what this is. This is a pestle. And this is the working end. This is what archaeologists look at, the working end or wear marks. So thank you, Bobby. So when I put my tools on under a dissecting scope, I could see the wear marks on these things, okay? Go ahead. Transitional. Transitional was soapstone. If anybody ever seen soapstone, it's compressed talc is what it is. And before they had clay pots, they used the soapstone to cook their food in. Now here's the problem, and this is with any stone technology or any Stone Age type of culture. When they're mixing up their food, whether it's like stew or meats or they're tenderizing something, that grit from this talc gets into the foodstuffs and you're chewing it. What happens is they wear down their teeth. When I was at the State Museum, there was like 23 skeletons were there. And I was surprised with Dr. Barry Kent. He was my mentor. He was the state archaeologist. He was a fabulous man. Passed away about 5 years ago. He said, what do you think, Deb? What do you think of all these marks on here? There's all these huge bone loss around the jaws. I said, I don't know. I said, is that injuries? He said, no. He said, that's abscesses. I said, abscesses from what? He said, bad teeth. I said, well, how could it be bad teeth? They didn't have no sugar or anything like that. They had perfect teeth. Some of them still had perfect teeth, but majority of them had them worn down. So what happens is when they were chewing, the grit acted like sandpaper, and it wore down the enamel. It exposed the root, got blood poisoning. A lot of people died of sepsis. Okay, and you'll find that throughout. Even the colonists in Jamestown and so forth, when they still were using like grinding tools and things like that, especially the women colonists, they would want to take shell and grind the shell down, mother of pearl, and they would try to brush their teeth with it, or they would polish their teeth with mother of pearl. And that ruined your teeth. You're so abrasive. And that's what happened. A lot of even the Calverts from Maryland, if you saw pictures, not pictures, but drawings, she had very poor teeth. All the people who had money and were wealthy had the worst teeth because they were trying to always shine up their teeth, and that's what happened. Okay. Again, soapstone bowl. Notice these lug handles, okay? These were, they didn't take them when they were nomadic. They were starting to settle down during this transitional period, and they would take these pots and they would cook over them. But again, you're getting the talc. Okay. This is now woodland. We went now from paleo, archaic, transitional, and now woodland. Probably now from transitional to woodland is the beginning of pottery. And so now they started with flat bottom pots. And take a look at some of the pottery that Larry made and some of these fragments. This was very important. They started actually settling down more. And because they were settling down more, they were able to grow crops. That was the number one reason why a lot of them did survive, because instead of becoming hunters and gatherers, they started becoming farmers. And the three crops that the Native Americans in this area really cultivated were corn, beans, and squash. Now, why is that important to someone, say, who's into science? Because corn, beans, and squash, they replenish the land, they replenish the nutrients. The corn acts as a structure. The beans does what they call nitrogen fixation. And the squash covers the ground so that it prevents a lot of dehydration. On a technical scope, that is the perfect combination where it didn't wear out the soil. Like today, colony farmers we have to do what they call crop rotation, right? You have so many crops, what happens? You lose the nutrients in the soil, they got to go to another area. They plant something else, or they have to let the ground fallow for a little while. So the Native Americans were very good at picking certain areas to grow certain crops. Okay. There's my husband, there's Larry. So Larry makes these, reproduces the actual things. We had the privilege of going to the state museums, a lot of other private collectors, and we take measurements and pictures, and we come back and we reproduce them, because so the museums like this, like Teresa, we have areas where we can actually show the people what they look like instead of being locked up in a closet, or you don't have access to it, down in the museums. So let me just point out about this big jar. This is an Owasco jar. These are called storage pots. Very, very important. When you're on a dig site, don't think we're finding big pots like this. You're still finding them in pieces. But all the pieces are there. So we take them and we reconstruct them, just like a big puzzle. So these pots were lifelines for the next generation. They would take their seeds, they would dry them, they would put them in these big jars. They wouldn't put any straw. What they would do is they would put maybe sand, very dried out sand. Then they would take a flat rock, and then they would take mud, and then they would dry the mud on that. Then they would take these pots, and they would keep them in their longhouses, right under them. That's under lock and key, so that nobody could steal it, the mice won't get to it, and there's no mold. So this was their lifeline for the next year. Okay, and when we start seeing a nice flat rock, we see mud around it, we all got excited because we know there's a pot there. Now the next one is what they call the Susquehanna. Go back. The next one is the pot. This is what we brought here today. In this Washington rural village in the 1600 to 1625, the Susquehanna were at their artistic peak. What was very important for Susquehanna was this human effigy. And when you come up here, you'll see it up close. It was just it's an icon, and it just has like a human mask to it. That was very important because that felt that was like a shaman, or that was their spirit connection. A lot of these are grave goods, where when someone would get buried, they would take, if it's a woman, usually they'll have a piece of food in there, or corn, or maybe she had a special working instrument. Or if it's a warrior, sometimes they would put a spear or a stone knife or whatever, and they would bury them. So that's a burial grave. And the reason why, just like if they believed in reincarnation, that these are tools or some implements that would be carried on into the next world. So they felt that they were going to a happier hunting grounds, let's put it that way. Okay? Look at these pipes, aren't they fabulous? This is all made out of clay or soapstone, and they were very artistic. The one nice thing that's very identifiable with these pipes is that if somebody brought this, first of all, I said, okay, definitely Susquehanna. Iroquoian always had the image facing them. So the effigy always faced the smoker. Smoke was not recreational like they use today. It was a communication between them and the gods. The smoke was a form of prayers that goes up to the heavens, and that smoke would take the cares and the worries or the questions of the village up to the heavens. So smoking was not a pastime, it was a part of a very real ritualistic ceremonies. Contact period. This is where our museum comes into play here, meaning Winters Heritage Museum, Winters House Heritage. Contact period here was 1550 to 1750. Contact period means when the white men, colonists I should say, met the Native Americans. And sometimes it was a clash, and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes they helped each other. Who really helped a lot of the Native Americans in the area when the colonists arrived. The Native Americans were really helped a lot of your Mennonites and back and forth, and also Amish and Quakers. Quakers took in a lot of, during this time period, took in a lot of the Native Americans because they were starting to lose their culture and they were starting to get very sick with different diseases. So these especially these three groups were very helpful to the Native Americans. Okay, so contact period, now the whole climate changed. It's pretty much just like what we have today. You have a whole bunch of trees, pine trees, chestnuts, acorns, oak, where we started to replace the grasslands like we started out originally. The Native Americans, they were trading their beaver furs. They almost wiped out the beaver population here. They're called the Beaver Wars. And they were trading it to the colonists or the English coming over, because back then, top hats, beaver felt top hats, that was the big rage. Everybody had a top hat. And what did the Native Americans want? They wanted, number one, their iron axes. Think about that. They wanted metal. They wanted their copper and brass kettles. They wanted the beads. Oh my God, it's like they were crazy over beads, especially blue beads in this area. So digging on and talking to a few other archaeologists, especially down in Jamestown, a lot of the chiefs down in there, especially the Pamunkey tribes and things like that, they loved blue beads. For some reason, it caught their eye. I thought it was interesting when Captain John Smith, when he came over up here in Port Deposit on Claiborne Island, or Garrett Island, which is what it's called now, he brought, I think it was 14 beads, 14 barrels of beads, most of them blue. I thought, wow, why is he bringing so much beads? How does he know what to bring? How does he know what to bring with these tradespeople? Well, how does he know what to trade with the Indians? What do you think they want? Well, you know what? These Native Americans, especially the Susquehannocks, they already were in contact way up in Canada. And they were getting a lot of their beads and some of their metal tools from the French. And so from that French Canada coming down the Susquehannock, there was a lot of beads that were being traded, brass pots, things like that. So when Captain John Smith arrived, they knew what they wanted, and Captain John was prepared to trade with them. Okay. One quick question, one interesting point, the brass kettles, you'll find a lot of brass kettles in our area here. Native Americans didn't want to cook out of them. They didn't like the taste. They said that when they cooked their meat in that kettle, it had had a different taste. So most of the brass and copper kettles were cut up for jewelry. And when you come to Blue Rock, we have a beautiful collection that we excavated. They showed the spiral earrings, the spiral necklaces. They're all cut up brass pots. So that was pretty interesting. Okay. So this is just a quick little map to show you the different types of contact periods, starting from 1500, 1550. Here you go, the Susquehannocks. This is your 1600 to 1625. That's your peak of your Susquehannocks. The next one is 1650. That's your refugees. This is when they started becoming Conestogas. Conestogas, where Susquehannocks became the Conestogas, and what they did is they started congregating in little areas over in Lancaster. And then you had the colonial 1763, where they brought in their colonial pipes, their glass bottles, china, flintlocks, things like that. So this is your typical soil profile, as I showed you in the very beginning, and that's how you're able to identify certain layers of the time period. These are the various sites in Lancaster and York. Again, the Schultz site, 1525 to 1600, that's where Blue Rock Heritage is. Right across the road is the Schultz sites. That's the first Susquehanna site in Lancaster. Then 2 miles down the road, you have the Strickler site. I find fascinating is this void. Barry Kent always was looking for this void. Every 25 years or so, the Susquehannocks, or mostly all Native Americans, had to move their villages. And the reason why is, number one, they used up all their resources. After 25 years, you know, they can't be walking miles and miles to get a piece of wood. Remember, they had to have fires burning all the time. They exhausted all the food, maybe their resources for trees, planting, fish migration, things like that. So they moved every 25 years. Now this void, everybody speculates. And I asked Dr. Ken, I said, where do you think this is? And he thinks it's right in Marietta, right in the center of Marietta. Everything's built up. If anybody, you know, nobody could really take a look at that because it's all built up. It's under parking lots or whatever. But he always felt that's where the next village was after the Strickler site. Then they started going back to Washington Borough. Then after Washington Borough, they moved across the river to the upper and lower Leaphart site. That's right behind the Zimmerman Center. I think now they call it New Native Park Lands is what they call it, or Native Lands Park. And then you have Conestoga in 1690 to 1763, okay? Mm-hmm. These are all the different past numbers. Oh, don't worry about that. You can't put a shovel in Washington Borough without coming up with something. It is so rich in Native American artifacts, more so than any kind of like colonial Williamsport, Williamstown, or any of those places. This is such a rich area archaeologically. Real quick about the Susquehanna, because a lot of people like to talk about the Susquehanna. I encourage all of you to read the book on the Paxton Boys by Jack Brubaker, and also Barry Kent's book on the Susquehanna. Again, a little bit on the movie or the video that you saw. Again, the Susquehannock were not that big. Captain John Smith, he exaggerated like you wouldn't believe. He wanted people, the colonization to come and how wealthy and how great resources, but he exaggerated a lot. And the surrounding other cultures of this, by the Susquehannocks, the Dutch didn't like them because they started out trading them, and they called them Mingwas. The French called them the Adaste, and it was a derogatory terms. And the one point, if those of you who are really into detailed history, the Susquehannocks were never part of the Iroquois Confederacy. The point I want to make is the Susquehannocks spoke and shared a language and culture base of Iroquoian language, but they were not part of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy. They were either kicked out or they left for reasons that we don't know about, but they were not part of the Confederacy. In fact, the Iroquois became their mortal enemy. So when the Susquehannocks were down here, the Iroquois were coming in and they also started killing them and causing a lot of damage to their culture. Again, get a chance, go online, read about the original document of Captain John Smith. Super interesting. I suggest you just do a Google search and talk about 1608 when Captain John Smith came up the Susquehanna. Again, take a look at that picture. This was a map that they had a picture of the Susquehannock. This is similar to what he looks like, but there's also, when they would draw these characters, sometimes it'd be by Father White would take a look and he would write down his assessments, his descriptions. The Susquehannocks, they had like a mohawk, and they had their hair shaved on one side. And the reason why is because at that time they did have bow and arrows and they didn't want to get the hair caught. Okay. And so then he has, supposed to have a big bear's head on him and a quiver and a big, we call them skull crackers, a big, like a skull cracker, a hammer that they would use as weaponry. And they were called the Susquehagnogs. Okay. Again, here's your typical Washington Borough village. You see, they had palisaded walls around their village. These are all your villages from the Susquehannocks had palisaded walls, meaning they had sometimes 2 or 3 rows of posts like this. How do you know they had them? Because we found the post hole moles. And when you're on an archaeological site and you come across a discoloration in the soil, you start marking it, and then you go a few more inches, a couple more inches, you get footage. Was it maybe half a foot or is it a whole foot away? And you start tracing. And we could trace the whole, perimeter of these wooden palisades. Okay. Again, just showing you the long houses and how these people lived. There's differences, just to give you an idea of the fighting that went on between Maryland and Pennsylvania. Again, like I said, they were looking to trade. Okay. Anybody been to the Hans Hirsch Museum? They have a great, great longhouse there. They have fake bark on these, and it's huge. And what I wanted to show you is that when the Susquehannocks had matrilinear heritage, whereas colonial people had it on the male side, Native Americans had it on the heritage, had on the woman's side. So if you came from this village and this longhouse, you would take a mate, and your mate, the man, would come into the village, into this longhouse. But if you were a man, you're going to that bride's place of residence. There was about 3 or 4 openings on top of here, and each one would have their typical open chimney. And they had little, let people say, well, what about privacy? They really didn't have a lot of privacy when you're living in these longhouses. But what they did have, they had animal hides and things like that to kind of block off certain areas. Okay. Here you go, that's your typical inside of a longhouse. You have your pots, and a lot of times too, a lot of your pottery with the women held a lot of power in Susquehannock society. The women were really the ones who was worried about the distribution of the foodstuffs. For example, you had a warrior, and he went out and he got a big deer. That warrior would come back, he would present it to the clan mother. The clan mother and her women, sisters, would cut it up, and they were the ones that distribute the food to the warrior. So if you didn't go out hunting and you didn't produce, you got the part that jumped over the fence last, okay? You didn't get your choice meats. And the choice meats for either deer or things like that was the tongue and the liver, because that was the most richest part for iron and things like that. So it was, you better not cross the clan mother, because she was very, very responsible to handing out and distributing the food. Also, clan mothers can also get together and they could oust a chief. So if once the chief is in, don't think he's in there for life. If you're going against a lot of the clan mothers, they're getting together and you're out. So it was really a really very democratic party of differences here. There I am, Larry and I. Oh my God, Larry, look how young we look on that. So we are on Washington Borough, and we're coming down and we're putting things in artifact and we're labeling everything. So that's what it's like. I wish I had a good back. That's the only problem. Okay. That's just another markers. Go ahead. Okay, these are the post hole moles. Remember I told you we found post hole moles? How do you know how big that village was? That Washington Borough village, it housed about 6,000 people. Just to give you an idea. And this is what you do. When you come across a disturbance in the soil, we do a cross-section, and then we're able to decide how those post-hole moles and how round they are, and how long they are as far as this distance is concerned. Okay, look at this. This is right next to me. We were excavating. This is a soapstone bear. I was new back then, and there's a lot of things that has mud on there. And there was this gentleman by the name of Ron Stoner. He had one eye. He was fabulous. He found every artifact possible. He'd been doing it for his whole life. And he showed this. He says, "This is something." I said, "What is it?" He wiped up the mud, and it's a bear. It's a bear carved out of soapstone. And again, we started finding these little effigies. They were used for religious or ceremonial purposes, but they were beautifully carved. Here's a triangle. This is a true arrowhead, this triangle. And then to the left, you'll see these are the copper kettles that they would roll up, and they would cause them, but they would use them as jewelry, like jingles and things like that. And again, there's the pot. There's a lot of typical pots that you could see here. There you are. They're called tinklers or jinglers, and they would wear them on their clothing, and they would jingle as they walked when they did the dances. Look at this. Isn't this great? This is carved soapstone. And I thought this was just fabulous that they had the artistry to be able to do something like this. And they would wear this as a pendant. And then again, this is, when you come on the team, this is where my job is to teach your eye what are you looking at, what time period is, and what type of lithic material is, so that you can be on the archaeology team. Okay. All right, let's go a little quicker because I already talked a lot about this. So let's go about the next slide. There's Larry with the bowls. Keep going. This is what you find in the field. Okay. Again, these are the real vessels that we take measurements of and we reproduce. Okay. Again, right? There's your Washington Borough pottery. This is called valence. This is a lot of your lobed clay, right? Doesn't that look Egyptian to you? Mm-hmm. Right? They have, I saw several of these they had on the pots, their legs are bent. There's holes going behind the legs, and they would use tie string or a cordage, and I think they were tying feathers too to make it more decorative. But that's very unusual. They would wrap decorations around the pot, and also earrings. They would put earrings on the pot. There's holes for earrings. Okay, these are just some of them here. Yeah. Conestoga Town, real quick. I'm not, because I know we're running out of time. Read the Paxton Boys. I talk about how the Susquehannocks, how they were really lost their culture and a majority of their population because of the Paxton Boys. Okay? What time is it anyway? What time? 2. Okay, I'll get it. All right, just at the end, here we are. This happened at the not the jail, the workstation. And it's where the Fulton Opera House is now. And it showed the Paxton Boys coming in. There were vigilantes coming into the village. They were locked up for their safety, the Native American Susquehannocks. And it was mostly older women and children and older men. And they came in and they just massacred them. And the townspeople just let it all happen. Okay, then I also work with a lot of Native Americans, Circle Legacy. I'm on their advisory committee. And it's very nice because most of the things you see in history are done through the white man's lens. It's nice to have Native Americans come on board for them to tell their history, give them an opportunity. Like they say, the war is always written, the history books are always written by the winners, okay? So we're giving them a chance to see how did they view the colonists, who helped them, who was, what happened to them. So, okay. And that's my Dr. Barry Kent. He was fabulous. He was a young archaeologist way back then, and he did most of your excavations in Pennsylvania. And if you want to see if you can get that book, it's called Susquehanna Indians by Dr. Barry Kent. And there he is holding one of Larry's pottery. We wanted him to critique it, and he passed away in 2019. So, okay, I think that's it. I think If there's any questions, please come on up. I took a lot of your time up, but I hope it was worth it. I'm passionate about this, and I wanted to give you more details about just, instead of just an overall general viewpoint. So thank you very much. Oh, and just at the end, let me end with this. This is the difference between a pothole hunter and archaeology. It says, what's the difference between an archaeologist and a pothole digger? Well, one digs square holes, and people who are raiders of the tomb dig round holes. So that's the difference. We always make sure we're digging square holes. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. You've been a good audience. Okay. All right, Jason.
Thank you, Debbie. That was wonderful. Thank you for bringing all
Yeah,
those
I want you all come up
things
and take a look.
I'm sure she would entertain questions and answer anything.
Yes,
for you.
absolutely.
That's
Right.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Just wanted to tell you, we did open our quilt show today. So our quilt show is going on for the next month. And then we have, Marie, who sets up your refreshments? Well, she has set up a whole thing. We have sweet, tasty treats and
Wow.
sweet bites, but they're for purchase. So we thought that if, you could come back during the whenever, and you could sit on the Cobble House porch with your tasty treats and sweet bites. But thank you, Marie, for all your hard work, and again, thank you to Robin for all
Thank you,
his
Robin.
work and oh yes, okay. Robin always reminds me. Yes. Next week, there's somebody in the audience who's going to be speaking, Roy, and we're excited. He's been thinking about this at every program he comes to, and he's going to be talking about the all-encompassing Benjamin Franklin, and he has a warehouse of Benjamin Franklin.
About 2 lockers. Storage.
Good for you.
He's not bringing the warehouse with him.
I wish I could.
Yeah.
But he's been working hard on this, so we're excited to have his program. And then Nelson Polite will be back again with, I forget her name, the woman, I'm sorry, her name escapes me right now, but they were here last month, and they gave a wonderful program. But he's going to be talking about the African American heritage of Southeast neighborhood. And then we have author Michael Harris coming June 17th, and he wrote a couple books, but the author of Fight for Philadelphia, and then he's going to be talking about certain battles. So we got a lot to look forward to. Please come on up. And
I'll give you my card. Anybody want my card? Come on up.
When I went first met her, how long did we talk? We must have
Oh,
talked
my
for
God.
an hour and a half. So she must have talked.
I do.
As well as I do.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. Thank you, Preston.